Before we begin, I feel it's important for you to know that I filmed this video on St. Patrick's Day, which makes this video my St. Paddy's Day plans. I sure know how to have a good time. So consider this something of an experiment. I've wanted to talk about music more on this channel as of late, and recently I have made steps in that direction. One of my favorite videos I've made as of late was a video essay about the 25th anniversary remix of R.E.M's Monster. So now I want to try my hand at an honest-to-goodness album review. And the album I want to discuss today is from a project I've loved for some years now. M83. M83 has had an interesting time of it. For the uninitiated, M83 began as a partnership between Anthony Gonzalez and Nicholas Fromageau, whose name I definitely fucked up, and the two albums they wrote together displayed a wide world of sounds that largely revolved around a sort of glitchy, shoegaze-flavored electronica. Fromageau left the project in 2004, and Gonzalez continued on his own, taking the shoegaze hints from the first albums and focusing it into a more synth-pop-driven sound with recollection of the 80s. It was in this style that his 2011 album Hurry Up We're Dreaming was recorded, a double album that shot the project into worldwide fame and cemented its lead single Midnight City as a radio staple. Since Hurry Up, he's recorded soundtracks for films including Joseph Kosinski's Oblivion, a quiet electronica album based on 80s video games, and Junk, a fun, quirky, but for my money unfocused love letter to 70s TV. All of this brings us to the present day and to M83's 9th studio album, Fantasy. My hopes for Fantasy were pretty high going in. While I have enjoyed and even loved tracks from Junk and M83's soundtrack endeavors, I felt that M83's post-Hurry Up discography hasn't been as strong as it could have been. This is especially the case with Junk and DSV2. These albums to me sounded aimless in places and lacked crucial elements of what draws me to M83's sound. The epic cinematic quality of the composition found on tracks like Lower Your Eyelids to Die with the Sun, or the reverb-soaked shoegaze overtones from tracks like Steve McQueen. With Fantasy, my hope was that this would mark a return to form for M83, that Gonzalez would return to working within the sounds that serve him the best. Much to my delight, this seems to have been what has happened, because Fantasy is definitely the best M83 album to have been released in years. The first thing that is apparent about this album is that it doesn't have anything on it that could be pointed to as the radio-friendly single of the record, a change from recent trajectory. Outside of the Digital Shade series, most of M83's albums have had a handful of tracks that sound like deliberate singles, from Midnight City and Steve McQueen on Hurry Up to the dramatic Don't Save Us from the Flames from Before the Dawn Heals Us. However, this album doesn't have any as easily identifiable potential smash hits. This seems to be deliberate. Gonzalez is on record as to saying that the runaway success of Hurry Up We're Dreaming was overwhelming, and in interviews for this album he said that this was an album he wanted to make for himself, without the pressure of trying to make it a viral success. As a result, the album is more interested in building soundscapes and build-ups, washing the listener along with tides and crescendos across tracks that frequently run over 6 minutes long. This might sound like a recipe for meandering, but this album actually sounds a lot more focused than M83 has sounded in years. The styles present on the album are definitely eclectic, ranging from ambient shades to danceable funk tunes, but they're all filtered perfectly through Gonzalez's dream pop sensibilities. As a result, despite being longer than most M83 albums, it's never a chore to listen to. It's always doing something new, but it's consistent nonetheless. It's a consistency that was sorely missing on Junk, and I'm delighted to see it again. The cinematic quality of M83's previous work is also emphasized again, leading to this album sounding more epic than its direct predecessors. Tracks like Us and the Rest build to these huge climaxes, explosions of synths, and massive drums that are awe-inspiring to listen to. I live in envy of those who will be able to attend M83's upcoming tour, as I'm sure that tracks from this album are going to sound absolutely monumental on stage. Also making a clear return is Gonzalez's shoegaze-based sensibilities. Fantasy is absolutely drenched in reverb, and the synths that permeate the record stack on top of one another to build oceans of sound that wash the listener along with the dreamy tones of the album. This tone is perfectly set by the opening 2 tracks of the album. Water Deep calmly opens the album with reverb-soaked acoustic guitars and soundscapes, then segues into Ocean's Niagara, a guitar-driven shoegaze number that pushes the album forward with an exhilarating energy. In a way, these 2 tracks seem to serve as almost a reassurance that M83 is well and truly back on form. Also in keeping with the more shoegaze-influenced style is the treatment of Gonzalez's vocals, which are equally soaked in reverb and sink and rise from the blankets of synths. On the track Amnesia, his voice starts front and center, then slips under the mix for the choruses. In the epic climax of Earth to Sea, his voice is buried in walls of sounds, and then leaps out for him to call out, I fucking love it. That's the actual line. As much as the guitars and synths, Gonzalez's voice is an instrument on this record, used to help emphasize the childlike sense of wonder and excitement the album seeks to inspire, a theme that Gonzalez has spent a fair amount of M83's discography exploring. And in this way, this album can almost be seen as M83 distilled. While it is very much an entity on its own, elements of all of M83's previous albums can be found in the DNA of this record. On the surface, the album seems to pull a lot of its use of quirky synths from Junk, but here the approach is refined through the grandeur found on Hurry Up We're Dreaming, brought closer to the M83 sound than Junk ever seemed to get, in my opinion. Tracks like Waterdeep and Sunny Boy Part 2 take on more ambient tones, casting memories back to the criminally overlooked Digital Shades Volume 1. That album's follow-up, DSV2, also finds itself sonically represented in the lovely mid-album break, Deceiver. The finale track, Dismemberment Bureau, ends on a deafening crescendo, one that calls back to the walls of sound found on Before the Dawn Heals Us. Even the glitchy electronica that began M83's career is present. The second half of Cool Nuit builds an intoxicating, eerie soundscape around a skittish arpeggio, one that puts me in mind of the strange sounds found on M83's self-titled debut, albeit with infinitely more refined production. Other M83s have already noted that, in this way, this album sounds like a love letter to the project's history and its sound. I find myself moved to agree. However, while this album marks a return to familiar sounds, it also makes sure to try new things, with incredible results. The title track is a perfect example of this, taking Gonzalez's dreamy synth washes and marrying them to a fast-paced bass line reminiscent of 70s funk. The result is one of the catchiest tracks on the album, and it actually puts me in mind of something from Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. It's also probably the closest thing to an obvious single on the track list besides the actual lead single Ocean's Niagara or maybe Amnesia. Now, is this album cheesy on occasion? Admittedly, yes. But cheesy has always gone hand in hand with M83 and is often used to great effect. The monologue on Raconte-moi une histoire from Hurry Up We're Dreaming is cheesy, but it aids in building the sense of childlike wonder the album revolves around. But in recent years, that balance has been lost. On Junk, the cheese factor on occasions begins to trend toward the actively ridiculous. If you've been on this channel for a while, you've probably heard me use Moon Crystal from that album as a joke, precisely because it sounds so corny. But on Fantasy, the cheesy balance has been restored. The only lyric on Ocean's Niagara, Beyond Adventure, is a cheesy one. But when coupled with the exhilarating dream pop that is that track, it feels totally sincere. The same goes for Laura. To me, that's the cheesiest cut on this album, but it never crosses the line into active silliness, and as a result has the charm that I think it's going for. Overall, this is definitely the M83 album I wanted, even if on first listen I didn't quite know it yet. The back half of the album initially threw me for a loop, as it sounded altogether very different from the first 6 tracks that had been released a month prior to the full album. However, when I approached it a second time, now understanding what the album would be as a whole, the entire thing opened itself up to me, and I fell in love with it. I hesitate at comparing it to the rest of M83's discography, as recency bias will definitely cloud any judgment I pass in that respect, but I can safely say that after a couple of albums that have left me vastly underwhelmed, this is a true return to form for Gonzalez. I honestly believe that the worst thing about this album is its cover art, which portrays a monster with several eyes sitting against a nondescript background. I don't like this cover very much at all, if I'm being honest, but it's not something that actively bothers me either. My point is, this is a definite high point for M83, and if the future holds more music like this, then I cannot wait for the next M83 album. If you're a fan of M83, I fully recommend that you listen to this album immediately.